You know, so-called green energy is a key issue in this week's Ontario election, and a man who's been following both green energy and the election closely is our friend Dr. Lorrie Goldstein from the Toronto Sun editorial board. Thanks for being here.
Yes, I'm the only doctor with a BA in English.
You know what? I call you a doctor because I would put it to you that you study empirically and you look through as much research on so-called global warming and green energy as any of the so-called extras, like Dr. Suzuki, who happens to be a doctor in fruit flyology.
I try to read a lot of it.
Yeah, you know, and I think you read with what sometimes scientists lack, which is a skeptical eye of everything.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do in the scientific method.
I mean, that's where the word science comes from, to check out, to inspect. Yeah. Listen, I want to. You said something interesting to me in the commercial break right before we came in. You said that you met with Dalton McGuinty when he came to the Toronto editorial board of the Sun here, and you sensed that he was actually backing away from his plans to trade carbon as if it was some commodity. Tell me about that. Why do you think he's backing down, Lorrie?
Well, yeah, no, in the election, his environment minister has been going around telling green groups, it's posted on YouTube, that Canada's proud to be leading Ontario's proud to be leading the cap and trade initiative known as the Western Climate Initiative for American states, 5 or 6 states, most significantly California and 4 provinces, to set up a regional cap and trade system. And regional cap and trade is the same as a carbon tax. It's a way of making us pay more for goods and services in the theory that we'll use less and therefore there won't be as many carbon emissions. But what he said, now in 2008, he joined this initiative and he chastised Stephen Harper. So we can't wait for Stephen Harper on cap and trade. We're going to move ahead. What he told us in the editorial board was that he won't introduce cap and trade unless the United States and Canada go ahead with it, which is a huge climb down. I mean, cap and trade's dead in the United States, not going anywhere. And Harper said he won't join in unless the Americans do it. So, and when we asked him why, he said, well, we don't have any partners. What he meant was that the provinces and the states that he's negotiating with are obviously having trouble getting this whole thing organized.
Yeah, I mean, who else would buy a carbon credit? I'm emitting some carbon dioxide right now when I'm talking. You know, I used to call it plant food, but now it's a pollutant that we capture and trade. I mean, anytime you burn anything, anytime you heat your house, anytime you drive a car, anytime you take a plane, carbon is emitted. In the past, no one's had to buy and sell that. Isn't the problem here, Lorrie, is that they're trying to buy and sell pixie dust, something that has no value?
They're trying to buy something and sell that's never been charged for before. Now, Mr. McGuinty says he wants credit up front for reducing coal-fired emissions, and I guess the other, basically the problem I think that's happening is that the public is coming to understand that a carbon tax, which everybody always understood, the government taxes stuff and makes it more expensive. Cap and trade does the same thing. In cap and trade, the government regulates the amount of industrial carbon dioxide emissions, and then it sells permits to industry, which permits them to emit these permits, and it lowers, the cap is it lowers it each year, and the carbon credits are traded, the trade aspect of cap and trade. But what it means is that business faces a new cost, and we all know what happens when business faces a new cost, prices go up.
Now the thing about buying and trading a colorless, odorless, harmless gas is it's tough to measure. If I go and buy a dozen eggs, I can open up the carton and say, yeah, all 12 eggs are here, I'll pay the money for it. When someone says, I will sell you a carbon credit, it says it's like when someone says, I'll sell you this unicorn dust I have here. Yes. Believe me, this is not just sand, it's unicorn dust. And when we're supposed to buy it from countries that like India or Russia, China, these are not the most accountable, transparent countries in the world. I'm not picking on them. No. I mean, listen, Enron was one of the first companies to sign up because they thought
they knew right away. Yeah. It was great for fraud.
So really, we do-gooders in the West and in Ontario, apparently, we're supposed to pay money to people in China and India and Russia if they promised on a stack of Bibles that they weren't going to make carbon. Isn't this just an invitation for corrupt third world shakedowns of stupid do-gooders in the West?
Yeah, and it's not the people; it's their governments, which are not the most not the most upright. What I wrote about Sunday was there's been a report in the science journal Nature suggesting that most of the carbon credits that India has sold under what's called the United Nations Clean Development Mechanism, intrinsic part of Kyoto, where countries in the West, like us, would invest in the developing world, like India, China, Brazil, South Korea, odd that they would be, but this is under, and we would get carbon credits. So if there were investors who wanted to fund a hydroelectric dam or a wind turbine factory or wind turbines in India, they would do that, and in return for their investment, they would get carbon credits because they could argue we are lowering carbon dioxide emissions in India.
Now, who would these people get cash from. I mean, the clean development mechanism, that's what it was called in Kyoto. So if you build some low carbon thing in the third world, you get
X number of credits.
And who pays you for those?
Which could then be sold on the...
That's what Dalton McGuinty would pay for in his exchange.
The government issues the credits, CDM issues the credits.
Is anyone actually doing this? Ontario's backing down. Is anyone in the world actually paying?
Where? The European Emissions Trading Scheme is all of Europe, and they are trading credits, and credits from the Clean Development Mechanism can be bought and sold on the European cap and trade scheme.
Now, who is the money? Is that tax money? Are those corporations?
It's corporations, but of course, in other words, when you buy and sell these credits, these companies then put the cost of those things into their products.
Now, are they forced to participate in this cap and trade in Europe?
Well, in Europe, there is a cap and trade system. So if you're in one of the 12,000 major emitters, yeah, you have to participate.
You're forced to.
Well, or it's going to cost you money if you keep blowing your emissions target.
Now, you mentioned nature. That is a prestigious, I would say, they sympathize with the theory of man-made global warming. So these are not Kyoto skeptics.
Oh, no,
this is not Halliburton or Dick Cheney.
Their writing is a concern that, good heavens, it looks like the whole carbon emissions trading scheme may be based on fraud. This is no good because we have to lower emissions. So what happened was, it came out of a WikiLeaks cable that appeared on WikiLeaks. U.S. State Department in 2008 interviews Indian government officials and senior businessmen about the clean development mechanism. Now, and it's supposed to be a two-stage approval process for every hydro dam you approve or every wind factory you approve. Validation by the local government and validation by CDM officials. Turns out, one of the senior CDM people in India said, well, how do you verify this? Well, we rely on the developers to say that they've met the conditions, that they're actually reducing emissions.
Oh, Lord, I got to get into that business.
The developers have a vested interest in doing that. So, of course, it's like going to someone who wants money, and he says, oh, yeah, I fulfilled all your conditions. Well, no, you can't do it that way. And so now there's a concern. India's about 20% of all the carbon credits in the world, because in the developing world, there are no limits on emissions. So they can churn out this stuff forever, right? So there's problems in India. We know there were similar problems in China. And if it's just like the subprime mortgage securities thing. If these carbon credits
don't based on BS,
if they don't represent real emission reductions,
I got to get in on that game. Dr. Lorrie Goldstein, we got to have you on next week to see what goes down, to see if this green scheme's going to go ahead, if Dalton McGuinty's reelected.
Yeah, well,
we got to talk to you more.
But there's new stuff on cap and trade every day, including murder. We'll talk about that some other time.
We'll talk about that next week. Dr. Lorrie Goldstein giving us the straight goods. Hey.